We talked about this last episode when looking at the unseen Father of the Old Testament, but I want to recap quickly for those who may have missed this concept. So the Old Testament makes a clear, startling declaration in Exodus 33:20 that no one may see God and live. And for centuries, this verse has been the bedrock for understanding the God of Israel, Yahweh, as a single, unseen, utterly transcendent figure. But is this only part of the story? What if the ancient Hebrew texts themselves, when we read them with the care they deserve, present us with a divine riddle that we need to solve? What if, page after page, we see patriarchs and prophets, Abraham, Jacob, Moses, Joshua, seeing God face to face and living? And this isn't a contradiction, it's a profound paradox embedded into the narrative of Scripture. It's a tension that ancient Jewish readers and scribes wrestled with intensely, leading to a concept that scholars now call the two powers in heaven. And Dr. Michael has done some great work on this. They saw that the Scriptures presented two distinct figures, identified by the divine name Yahweh, who acted in perfect, seamless unity. And this tension has not gone away. In fact, it remains a major dividing line, with Unitarian groups from the Iglesia Ni Cristo, Jehovah's Witnesses, and certain Black Hebrew Israelite camps offering their own solutions, most often by just diminishing or ignoring one side of the paradox. There was the unseen, unheard Father, the fountainhead of all divinity, whom no one could see and live, as we discussed in part 1. And there was a second, visible Yahweh, who acted as his personal, tangible presence in the real world. What if this second Yahweh, this visible manifestation of God, is the key that unlocks the entire biblical narrative from Genesis to Revelation? So in this video, I'll begin to uncover the mysterious figure who is called Yahweh, who acts as God and yet is sent by God. The very same figure later identified by the New Testament apostles as the Son. So sit back, get ready to take some notes, and don't forget to like and subscribe before we get going. All right, point number 1, the God you can see. So at the heart of this mystery lies this fascinating logical paradox. I'll lay it out. Premise 1, no one can see God and live. Premise 2, numerous figures in the Old Testament saw a being they explicitly identified as God and lived to tell about it. And the only logical conclusion is that they were seeing a divine person who is fully Yahweh, but is not God the Father, a visible Yahweh sent from the invisible Yahweh. It's like having a firm rule that the king never leaves the castle, yet possessing dozens of credible reports of the king walking among his people in the marketplace. You wouldn't assume the reports are false, there's too many of them. You would need to reconcile the known information, and then you'd conclude that there must be a second royal figure who shares the king's identity and authority. See, modern Unitarian groups, such as Iglesia Ni Cristo and Jehovah's Witnesses, for example, they attempt to resolve this paradox by just ignoring a complete data set and insisting that the figure seen was merely an angel and never God, thereby forcing a reading that really just distorts the plain meaning of the text. Point number 2, they saw God and lived. Now, if you think this seen God versus unseen God tension is just a later theological problem, think again, because the Torah itself creates it. Let's start with Exodus 24, 9 through 11. We see Moses goes up Sinai with Aaron, Nadab, and Abihu, and the 70 elders. And the text here is crystal clear. It says, they saw the God of Israel. And then it adds something almost shocking. They ate and drank. In other words, this isn't some sort of vague, mystical, spiritual impression. No, it's an encounter described as sight, presence, and fellowship. And they live. Then you get to Exodus 33:11, where we're told Yahweh used to speak to Moses face to face as a man speaks to his friend. That's relational language, folks. That's personal presence language, not anything less. The text says face to face. And then Numbers 12, 6 through 8 pushes it even further. God distinguishes Moses from every other prophet. Others get visions and riddles, but with Moses, God says, I speak with him mouth to mouth clearly, and he beholds the form of Yahweh. And that word form matters here. The text is telling you Moses uniquely experienced God's manifested presence without claiming Moses comprehended God's infinite essence. So here's the point. The Torah gives you both truths at the same time. God is the one no man can see and live. Yet God is also the one who is truly seen and truly encountered, truly present with his people, and they live. That means we're forced into a category that Scripture itself demands. The invisible God can reveal himself through a visible, personal manifestation. God being present without God being reduced. And once that category exists, the next question here becomes unavoidable. Who is this visible divine figure that shows up across the Old Testament? That's where the Bible introduces a recurring character with a very specific title. See, our investigation begins with this visible figure often called the Angel of Yahweh. In Hebrew, this literally just means the messenger of Yahweh. But listen, I'm not talking about some angelic postal worker here. This figure has the full authority of the monarch who sent him. His words are the king's words. This messenger's identity often merges completely with God himself. So this requires careful analysis of the biblical data, which brings us to point 3, the burning bush, where we have one encounter but 3 labels. So if anyone thinks Angel of Yahweh is just a created angel doing some of God's errands for him, Exodus 3 is where that assumption just gets exposed. So watch the text carefully. Let's walk through it. Exodus 3:2 opens by saying, "The angel of Yahweh appeared to him, Moses, in a flame of fire out of the midst of a bush." So again, in Hebrew, that's the messenger of Yahweh. So someone like TikTok Unitarians might say, okay, angel, messenger, created being, right? But the passage immediately forces you to slow down. In Exodus 3:4, it says, "When Yahweh saw that he turned aside to see, God called to him out of the bush." Notice what just happened. The text is stacking titles in a single continuous event. We see the angel of Yahweh appears in verse 2, then we have Yahweh sees and engages in verse 4, and God calls from the bush in verse 4. This is not 3 different beings being swapped out like actors in some sort of play. No, it's one encounter, one voice, and one presence. But then comes the line that ends the debate here. Exodus 3:6, the speaker says, "I, the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob." And Moses responds by hiding his face because he's afraid to look. He's afraid to look at what? Not a literal angelic being. No, he hides his face because he knows he's in the presence of God. And the speaker doesn't just identify as God, he speaks with God's covenantal authority. He says, "I have surely seen the affliction of my people. I have heard their cry. I know their sufferings. I have come down to deliver them." In Exodus 3:7-8. That is Yahweh's own covenantal voice, not "God told me to tell you, Moses." No, this is "I have seen, I have come down." And then Moses asks the most important question in the entire chapter. If I come to Israel and say, "The God of your fathers has sent me," and they ask, "What is his name?" what shall I say? In Exodus 3:13. And the answer is not the answer of a created angelic messenger. No. Exodus 3 verses 14-15, the speaker says, "I am who I am." And then say to the people of Israel, "I am has sent me to you." And then he goes even further. He says, "Yahweh, this is my name forever." So here's the point. The angel of Yahweh in Exodus 3 is not treated like a created angel. The messenger is identified with Yahweh, speaks as God, declares the ground holy, reveals the divine name Yahweh, and claims covenantal identity. And yet, the title messenger still matters. See, Unitarians can try to explain away, they can try to avoid the passage or try and skip to some other verse in the Bible to run, but it doesn't work. The passage signals a real distinction, not separation, not another God, but a real sentness within the one God, a divine person who reveals Yahweh without exhausting Yahweh. This is the Old Testament giving you a category that makes the second Yahweh text coherent instead of contradictory. All right, next point 4, Exodus 23. where he says, my name is in him. All right, so once we have Exodus 3 data set on the table, Exodus 23 verses 20 through 23 become a devastating follow-up, where Yahweh says, behold, I send an angel before you. Pay careful attention to him and obey his voice. Do not rebel against him, for he will not pardon your transgressions, for my name is in him. So do you hear the implications here? This angel isn't just delivering information. Israel must obey his voice. Language used for obeying Yahweh. And Yahweh says his own name is in him. In Scripture, the name Yahweh is not a label. It's identity, it's authority, and it's presence. Even the warning here, it's staggering. He will not pardon your transgression. See, forgiveness and judgment at this level are not in the job description of a created angel. This is a messenger who carries Yahweh's authority because Yahweh's name is in him. So Exodus alone gives you the framework. A messenger who is distinct enough to be sent, yet God, to bear Yahweh's name and demand Yahweh's obedience. And once you see that, the rest of the Old Testament starts reading like a pattern instead of some weird pile of Unitarian exceptions. And I'll show you in the next episode. All right, so here's what part 1 proved from the Old Testament itself. Exodus says no one can see God and live, yet the Torah repeatedly shows people seeing God and living, which forces a biblical category. The invisible God reveals himself through a visible, personal, bodily appearance. God literally present without God being reduced in any way. And when you track that visible Yahweh through Exodus 3 through Exodus 23, and as we'll see next episode, Abraham, Jacob, Joshua, the Angel of Yahweh text, and even Daniel's furnace scene, the pattern is consistent. A divine figure who is called Yahweh, who acts as God, receives worship, and yet is sent by God. So if that helped, I want you to go ahead and like and subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the part 2 follow-up. And then comment visible Yahweh and tell me which passage hit you the hardest. And then share this with someone who says, the Trinity started at the Council of Nicaea. No. Because we're pulling personal distinctions straight from Torah. This is Dr. Shaun Michael with Apex Apologetic, where we equip believers to engage culture with biblical clarity and to defend the faith once for all delivered to the saints. I'll see you next time for the epic conclusion of the Son in the Old Testament. Out.